What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to go through my top 30 running back rankings for fantasy football. We just had the huge Jonathan Taylor news drop yesterday where he is going to stay on the PUP, stay on the Colts, and then miss a minimum of 4 games, which shakes everything up. So I wanted to get an updated set of rankings out to you guys as soon as possible. I know a lot of drafts are coming up here, so as always, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like, let's go.
Like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, a few notes before we get into this. First of all, this is going to be a tier list. So we're going to tier these players sort of where I see the natural tier breaks. I feel much stronger about the tiers and sort of the divides between the running back positions. If you want to swap rankings like my RB1 versus my RB2, they're both in the same tier, you can flip-flop them. It's really whatever, but this is just kind of how I see the running back landscape right now, and these are geared towards PPR and half PPR leagues. Now, I also want to say, if you want the full rankings for your draft coming up, we're going through our top 30. I want to say I probably have like 70 or more running backs ranked in our top 200. That is on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I'll have a link in the description, comment section down below as well, where you click it, it'll take you to patreon.com, and you can get my top 200 rankings, where it's pretty much a cheat sheet. You can check off every single player. I have my target rounds for each player. All of the players are tiered. I have my targets and avoids highlighted. It is the #1 cheat sheet that you need to dominate your drafts. I take it to every single high stakes draft I have and every single home league I have as well. So with that being said, let's get into our first tier here, which is our 20-plus point per game Elite RB1s. These are guys that pretty much from day one you can pencil in for like about 20-plus points per game with upside to be the RB1 overall in fantasy. I don't know why I'm struggling here, but we have Christian McCaffrey. And to me, he has like the clearest path to 23-plus points per game, which is really rare these days. We haven't seen that since 2020 with Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook. I think it's getting too cute not putting Christian McCaffrey here. I can't put him any lower than this. I know that the Elijah Mitchell splits aren't great, but that was in an offense last year where Christian McCaffrey was learning on the fly. He didn't get a full offseason to fully install himself into the playbook and the offense. And I think at the very least, even if he does split a good chunk of work with Elijah Mitchell, he's going to get all the passing game work. He's going to be used in the red zone. And if he's going to be on a good offense that scores touchdowns and he's scoring touchdowns and catching passes, it's tough to count out Christian McCaffrey and move him any lower than this. Like, this is a guy, when we look back on, like, fantasy football, he is going to go down as one of these, like, Hall of Famers in our game. Like your Jamal Charles and your Brian Westbrooks and your, these guys who might not make the Hall of Fame, but we look back on, like, your Todd Gurley's as well, where they were just, like, monsters for fantasy football. And I think it's a mistake that while McCaffrey's still in his prime on a good team, fading that before we see any kind of drop-off at all. Ever since he's been in the league, he has gapped the field. Since 2017, he's at 22.1 points per game over his entire career. That's including like a RB14 in points per game rookie season. So really impressive. He's still that guy. I can't put him any lower. And if you want to have him as high as like your 101 in fantasy football, I really can't fault you at all. Now, moving on from that, we have our RB2 here, Bijan Robinson. And he is my biggest round 1 target in 2023. To me, once, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Kupp, Tyreek Hill off the board, and then Christian McCaffrey, of course, Bijan's my 106 for me. This is the Prince who was promised, the best running back prospects in Saquon Barkley. Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley in their rookie years would have been RB1 and RB2 overall last season. The running back landscape has been as low scoring as it's ever been. I want to bet on the fresh legs, the new generational talent coming into the NFL, and he gets to run in an Arthur Smith offense who had a bunch of good seasons with Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry can't catch the football the same way that Bijan Robinson can. Bijan Robinson's, I believe, 77th percentile college target share, can line up outside, run routes, catch passes, has a ton of upside here. And the Falcons also have the 10th best offensive line on established to run. So there should be efficiency here. Arthur Smith can scheme a good run game. And just based on what he did in the preseason, this is a tweet from Dwayne McFarland. We're going to be referencing Dwayne McFarland a ton. He does amazing work where he breaks down the usage that running backs see in season and in the preseason. And in the second preseason game, he handled 80% of the rush attempts and posted a 60% route participation with the starters. Since 2012, running backs that reached 65% and 60% averaged 20.8 points per game. That is attainable. He is a top 5 running back with RB1 overall upside. So he had an 80% rush attempt share in the preseason. 80% is pretty crazy, but if you just lower it down to 65%, and if he still runs 60% of the routes, he's looking amazing. Like, running 60% of the routes is an elite number. He was already getting used as a pass catcher in the preseason. He's going to be the lead back. He was already out snapping, out carrying Tyler Algier. I'm really not all that worried about Tyler Algier, a day 3 pick. Bijan Robinson, to me, has all the upside in the world. He has size, he has speed, pass catching, draft capital, everything that we could possibly want in an offense that's going to be very efficient in terms of running on the ground. Now, moving on, we have our last running back in this tier, Austin Ekeler. He was the RB1 overall last year. He had 21.9 points per game. The issue is that he has 2 20-plus point per game seasons. Neither of them have cracked the top 10 best point per game seasons for a running back since 2018, so in the last 5 seasons. So it's really just he's been at the top of a really weak running back landscape, but of course it doesn't mean that we can really have him much lower than this, right? Like, to me, he's tapped out at 21.9 points per game, and to me, I think McCaffrey and Bijan can get to like 23-plus and like really dominate. The issue with Ekeler is like he's at risk for like guys like Kupp and Chase and Jefferson to outscore him. But we might just be in an era where 21.9 points a game like he had last year is RB1 overall, and he's going to be in a really good offense this year where Justin Herbert was hurt last year. He's going to be fully healthy. You have Kellen Moore that's going to make this a really exciting offense. So you can only put Ekeler solo. Again, he's still a top 3 running back for me. I just don't know how high the ceiling is. Because again, he had 21.9 points per game on 18 touchdowns and over 100 catches last year. I don't know how he improves on that. He's also on the back half of his career at this point, but he's not a guy I'm going to really bet against or tell you that you can't draft. Moving on here, we have our next tier, which is just your RB1s. These are guys that are talented running backs. Some of them have a case for RB1 overall. Just guys that you draft and you feel good about as an RB1. Like, they can be your RB1 in a hero RB build, no problem. And first up, our RB4, we have Tony Pollard, who was the RB8 in points per game last year with just a 48% opportunity share, which was 34th in the NFL. 34th in opportunity share, but he was 8th in points per game, which is just absolutely insane. And he's one of the most electric players in the league. He was top 5 in breakaway run rate each of the last 2 seasons. Cowboys also have the 6th best offensive line and established the run. He's going to make big plays. He's going to rush efficiently. And how he hits RB1 overall is receiving upside. There's no Zeke this year to eat into touches, so he's also going to get a lot more on the goal line. But in terms of the receiving upside, Zeke ran 234 routes last year to Pollard's 245. I think Pollard absorbs a good chunk of that. This is a guy who was top 10 in yards per out run last year, receiving grade, yards per reception. If he can see an Ekeler-Kamara type workload where he gets 70-plus catches and he's an efficient runner and he scores over like 12 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns, Tony Pollard can make a run at RB1 overall. One of my favorite hero RB candidates this year. At RB5, we have Saquon Barkley, who is kind of a volume play. He's one of the few running backs in the NFL that you can kind of pencil in for an 80% opportunity share. Matt Breida, Eric Gray are non-factors behind him. He was the RB5 in points per game last year. He had over 1,300 rushing yards, 50-plus receptions. My only concerns with Saquon Barkley is like you need efficiency to get to those, RB1 overall legendary type seasons. And last year, Saquon wasn't very efficient and didn't really look great. Like, his yards per out run was 49th. His targets per out run was 31st. So he wasn't really commanding targets or being that efficient in the passing game. Outside the top 60 in missed tackles forced per attempt, 40th in explosive run rate. Yards after contact per attempt was 53rd. Elusiveness rating was 62nd. Now, that's not to say that efficiency is super sticky year to year. He can definitely bounce back in the efficiency department. It's a little bit less likely the further you get into a running back's career. But I'm open to the idea that Saquon Barkley is Saquon Barkley and can just bounce back before getting too old here. And I'm excited to kind of see what this offense looks like in year 2 with Brian Dable, with Darren Waller getting added to this offense where there's now a threat outside of Saquon Barkley, and maybe that gives him some more efficiency in the run game or in the passing game. So I'm open to the idea that Saquon has upside this year. And when we talk about like projectable floors, he has one of the highest in the NFL. Then we have Nick Chubb, who is my RB6, who is my 205 in my rankings. I cannot stress that enough. He is a fade for me in the first round of drafts, which is where he's going in home leagues. I have a Nick Chubb high stakes team, $350 team with Nick Chubb in there because he got to us in the mid-second. I like him in the mid-second. I understand the appeal with Nick Chubb, right? Like he is arguably the best running back in the NFL. He's been top 5 in rushing yards over expected per attempt every single year that he's been in the league. He has the 3rd best offensive line on established to run, and there's upside that Deshaun Watson reverts back to who he was before last year and carries this offense forward. But the issue that I have is just like the receiving upside and just the upside in general. This is a guy who, like, if we're going to draft a running back in the first round, which is where Nick Chubb is going, he needs a clear path to RB1 overall because the bust risk is so high. And with Nick Chubb, it gets so tough to take him in the first round for me. Again, mid-second, I'm fine with it. I am fine with it. But Nick Chubb, for me, he's never finished as a top 5 running back in points per game. Again, you need clear RB1 overall upside. It's tough to say that in year 6 here, at age 27, he's going to have his first top 5 finish where he takes on this receiving role, because that's what you need for the upside here. And the issue is that we've seen Nick Chubb in games without Kareem Hunt, while Kareem Hunt was in this offense with Kevin Stefanski, and every time that Kareem Hunt has missed time, Nick Chubb hasn't picked up any more receiving work. He stayed at 16.7 points per game or 16.5 points per game area. His receptions are still 1.4 per game, 1.7, 1.89 targets per game. Like, nothing really goes up in the receiving game when Kareem Hunt hasn't played. Now, can that change? Sure. But I think that if you draft him in the first round, you're pricing like that's a given and a certainty, when I think it's more of a like projectable upside thing. So that's my gripe with Nick Chubb. But again, he is my RB6, my 205, somebody that I do think is a good bet in fantasy. I do think that people are getting a bit carried away, though. Now, moving on from that, we have our RB7 and our low-end RB1s area, which are, you know, some of them have RB1 overall upside. Some of them don't to me. But these are guys where if I start wide receiver, I'm very much fine with them being my RB1 and like a hero RB build where we sort of, you know, get a little bit fancy with it with 2 straight wide receivers before then. And first up here, we have Josh Jacobs at RB7. His contract dispute's over. He's back at camp. He's going to be playing. He was the RB3 in points per game last year. You can pencil him in for like 17-plus points per game, which is nice. The ceiling just doesn't feel super high to want to draft him like in the top 2 rounds or put him in this tier as well. Like, he had the best year of his career last year, and he still never really challenged for for RB1 overall in points per game. He likely probably caps out around like 19, 20 points per game. And there's also some risk of this offense being bad. This is the 27th offensive line established to run, and he's also coming off a career high in touches, which I know scares some people. It's a little bit scary. I will push back on some of those studies where it's like, oh, look at all the running backs with X amount of touches in a given season and what they do in that next season. Josh Jacobs is still pretty young in his career. I think it adds some risk, but I don't think I think calling Jacobs a complete fade just based on the amount of volume that he handled in the year previous, I think is a little bit lazy. We're not that high on Josh Jacobs, but it does feel crazy to like make him a do not draft player just based on his touches in the previous year. Now, after that, we have Derrick Henry. He's my RB8. We don't really love Derrick Henry, but it's tough to put him much lower than this. He was the RB4 in points per game last year at 18.9, but he is a pretty brutal risk to take on. He is going into his 8th year. He's 29 years old. He has the 2nd most touches among all active running backs, so that's over an entire career, right? That's not just the previous year, but Derrick Henry has been shouldering a workload for time now. 2nd most touches in the league behind just Ezekiel Elliott. And then he's on this Titans offense that's going to be pretty brutal. They have the 32nd offensive line and established the run. They're coming off a year where they were bottom 5 in scoring. This could be a team where if they start 1-6, they bench Ryan Tannehill and go to Will Levis or Malik Davis. Like, it's tough. You know, this is a guy who only hit 20-plus points per game one time in his entire career. And again, when we're drafting running backs, we need upside because they are risky bets where they get hurt and they have short shelf lives. So it's tough, but still RB8, 2-3 turn Derrick Henry, which is where he goes on underdog. I'm fine taking him there, but Homely's at like 202. That's a price that I struggle to pay here. Now, some people are like commenting on the last video, like, Ron, like, why are you talking about ADP and stuff? I think it's important to sort of look through this with price in mind as well, and just sort of, I want to just break down how I feel about these players in general to you guys. For anyone, I know a lot of you guys are probably like cramming as well, where you're like scrambling to try and figure out what you're going to do for your fantasy drafts, and I want to make sure that I'm being transparent with how I feel about these players. Now, RB9, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, and we know that receptions breed upside in fantasy football. The only running backs with over 80 receptions last year were Eckler and McCaffrey. They were also the only 2 running backs with 20-plus points per game. And Gibbs is a special college receiving talent. 93rd percentile college target share, and this was someone who had 104 receptions over his 3-year career in college with 44 catches in his final season. To put that in comparison, Saquon and CMC both had 80 or more catches in their rookie years in the NFL. McCaffrey had 99 career receptions, so Gibbs had 104. McCaffrey had 99 career receptions, 37 in his final year. So Gibbs had more receptions in his entire 3-year career and more receptions in his final season playing at a school like Alabama than McCaffrey had over his entire career. And same thing with Saquon. Saquon had 102 receptions in his 3-year career, 2 less than Gibbs. Now, I will say Saquon had 54 catches in his final year, which is pretty crazy. But it just goes to show that, these guys are all top 12 draft picks in the NFL, and Jahmyr Gibbs has one of the craziest receiving profiles of all time. Again, 104 receptions in just 3 seasons in college is absolutely absurd. Now, this is a guy who can just come into the NFL, challenge for 80-plus catches right out the gate, and if he has like the second most targets on the Lions and he can challenge for 80-plus catches, he's going to be in the mix for like top 3 running back in fantasy just because PPR leagues, that is a cheat code. Now, on top of the receiving upside, we don't need him to shoulder a huge workload because the PPR is going to get him there, right? Like we've seen Alvin Kamara, we've seen Austin Eckler hit 20-plus points per game without even hitting 1,000-plus rushing yards, which I think is the kind of guy that Jahmyr Gibbs is here, where he's 199 pounds, 5'9", but he has 4.36 speed. So there's going to be a lot of efficiency here. He's going to have big plays. He's going to catch passes. He's going to mix in as like a weapon in the red zone here. And this is an offense you want a part of, where they're going to be in dome games. They're going to be in shootouts with like the Vikings. They're going to also be a high-scoring offense that invested draft capital into Jahmyr Gibbs. He's like their second-best weapon on offense. To me, there's just a lot of upside with Jahmyr Gibbs here. And I even think, even in a world where Jahmyr Gibbs smashes, I think even David Montgomery can still be a top 30 running back. And Gibbs can still be really good for fantasy. Now, moving on from that, we have our RB10 here, Ramondre Stevenson. And when we talk about running backs with upside, Gibbs and Ramondre are, to me, they have the most upside in this area. Ramondre Stevenson was the RB10 in points per game last year with just 6 touchdowns in what was a really bad offense with Matt Patricia. They go from Matt Patricia to Bill O'Brien, which, say what you want about Bill O'Brien, he can scheme an offense. Like, his offenses haven't been terrible. They're all, they hover around like anywhere from like top 10 to like league average most of the time. He's a terrible GM. He makes bad trades, but when he can just focus on calling plays, he's not awful. He's at least league average, which is a huge upgrade over Matt Patricia, who is like a defensive coordinator who was calling plays. And Ramondre is such a unique talent because he was 4th in receptions last year with 69. The guys in front of him, up top, again, Eckler and McCaffrey, the 2 guys who had 80-plus catches and were 20-plus point per game, they're both sub 205 pounds. Ramondre Stevenson's like 230, and he catches passes, which is really interesting because it gives him this upside to shoulder a big workload, take goal line carries, catch passes, and we really, really want that. He was 4th in target share last year at 17.3%, 3rd among running backs with 89 targets. It's just the upside is insane. Like, it's super rare to have that size and also catch passes. And he also has juice, too. He was third in yards after contact per attempt. He was 11th in elusiveness rating, 10th in explosive run rate, 5th most rushes of 15-plus yards last year, 11th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. Like, he is a good player between the tackles. He catches passes. And the Patriots cut Ty Montgomery, J.J. Taylor, Kevin Harris, and then traded Pierre Strong. Their only running backs right now are Zeke Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson, which to me is a big vote of confidence in Ramondre. And I think that Hayden Winks kind of pointed it out well here, that people are assuming that Zeke's going to be like this huge vulture on the goal line as a reason not to draft Ramondre Stevenson. Hayden Winks sort of looked at data on runs of 3 or fewer yards to go where there wasn't a blown block. Success rate, Zeke 67%, Ramondre 62%. Points earned per run, Ramondre 0, Zeke minus 0.1. Like, it's very similar. Like, Zeke isn't miles better than Ramondre in short yard situations. Again, Ramondre Stevenson's a 230-pound back who has juice and is an efficient runner. Like, he's going to be good in short yardage. Now, he also adds, I do think the Patriots should spell Ramondre on these short yardage runs. However, he can't play all the downs. I'd rather use Ramondre's strengths on more explosive run calls and as a pass catcher. Then Taylor Kyles is a Patriots beat reporter. He said, I think the idea that Ramondre isn't good in short yard situations is misguided. Biggest thing is taking the load off Stevenson after he was grossly overused last season. So Zeke is really just going to be a change of pace, breather back for Ramondre Stevenson. He's probably going to mix it on the goal line, take some carries between the 20s. But again, like, in this modern NFL, there aren't bell cows anymore. Like, there's very few. Like, Saquon's one of them. But Ramondre, if he is going to get, like, let's say it's a 60-40 split on the goal line and he gets all the receiving work, and then he's also the featured running back, he's going to do really well. If he scores, 10, 12, any more touchdowns than that 6 that he had last year, he could absolutely crush, especially on these Patriots teams where we've seen before, like Damian Harris have like 17 touchdowns or like 15 touchdowns. I think it might have been 14, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, but on like a rookie Mac Jones offense. So Really excited for what Ramondre could be this year. Then we have our high-end RB2s with RB1 upside, our RB11, Breece Hall. Now, this tier are guys that are my 2 favorite targets in the dead zone that I think have like top 5 league-winning type upside. And with Breece Hall, I understand that the floor is low, right? The ACL injury is tough, and the downside is that he's not the same guy after the ACL injury, and he can never handle enough volume. He can never handle enough volume to truly pay off. And like Dalvin Cook kind of splits work with him the entire year. But the upside is like RB1 overall from week 6 on. If we get pre-injury Breece Hall, or even like 90 to 95% of pre-injury Breece Hall. This was a guy last year who, through 7 weeks, or before tearing his ACL in week 7, he was the RB8 with 17 points per game. He wasn't even officially the starting running back until week 6, so 5 of those 6 weeks, he wasn't even listed as a starting running back. He didn't have over a 50% snap share until week 4. It's just crazy. And now he gets to play with Aaron Rodgers in a Nathaniel Hackett offense, and this Aaron Jones role netted Aaron Jones 2 top 5 finishes in fantasy and was routinely a first-round pick in fantasy football, despite being like a 60-40 split with Jamal Williams. So people love to say like, well, Dalvin Cook is here, he's going to be stealing volume. That's really not a huge deal. It's going to be like a 60-40 split where Breece Hall is the main guy. Again, if Breece Hall is the guy that he was before the ACL injury, what we were drafting him for. And in that role where he's catching passes and being used in the red zone, he's going to be just fine. This is a guy who was RB8 in points per game last year on under a 50% snap share. He doesn't need 350 touches to pay off. He just needs to be out there in the crucial situations, which I think he will be. And anywhere in like the 4th round, I'm drafting Breece Hall this year. Now, moving on, we have our RB12, Travis Etienne, electric rusher. He was 12th in breakaway run rate last year, 9th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 3rd in rush yards over expected per attempt, 2nd in NFL next-gen stats success rate, 8th in yards per carry, 4th fastest ball carrier speed among all running backs tracked last year. The guy is a monster between the tackles. Now, where we need him to improve is in the receiving game and in the scoring touchdown department. Receiving game, I think that there is upside there. He had just 17 receptions in his first 2 seasons of college. When we look after that, his year 3 and 4 seasons of college, he had 85 catches. So he goes from 17 in his first 2 years. His last 2 years, he has 85 catches. So he sort of ramped that up, found his way catching the ball later on in his college career. I think that we could see a similar jump in the pros. Now, at this point in time, people love to, people are scared about Tank Bigsby. I like Tank Bigsby. I have him in rookie drafts. I have him in leagues, but a 3rd-round pick isn't enough for me to move off of a guy like Etienne. And so far in the preseason, he's gotten really, really strong usage, where Dwayne McFarland, again, utilization report, he does great stuff. Travis Etienne seems to have the lead role that we want. Again, Travis Etienne's not going to be a guy that needs 350 carries like Breece Hall, but he just needs the important snaps, and that's what he had. 67% of the snaps. He had a 63% route participation. To put in perspective, Eckler was at 57% last year. Etienne was at 41%. Anything over 60% is elite. So if that carries over, that's absolutely huge. He had 100% of the carries inside the 5, so he's getting the goal line work, he's getting the passing down work, and he's in like a 65-35 split in terms of the snaps. And that's all we really need for Etienne to pay off in this good offense in 2023. Now, moving on, we have our RB2s here, which is just a dense tier of like traditional RB2 candidates. Some of them are dead zone-ish, some are not. And at RB13, we have Joe Mixon, who to me is pretty dead zone-ish to me. I understand that he was an RB1 last year. He has no Pirine. He's going to be on a high-scoring offense this year. But the issue for me is that he's now 27, and he's just not that good anymore. If I take on the risk of a running back, I want them to have really high upside. And this was a guy last year in the perfect situation, couldn't crack 1,000 rushing yards, couldn't crack the top 5 running backs in points per game. He was 3rd in volume in expected points per game, but he had a minus 0.8 fantasy points over expected per game, so he was underperforming on his volume even in this good offense. He hasn't been top 20 rushing yards over expected since 2018. In 2022, he was 47th in breakaway run rate, 65th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 64th in elusiveness rating, 61st in yards after contact per attempt. It's just tough. Like, I just don't think that he is the same guy that we know in terms of Joe Mixon. He's just kind of a volume-dependent RB2, and those are profiles that I don't really like to chase. I also think that we're going to see Travion Williams or Chris Evans or Chase Brown. One of these guys are going to absorb a lot of the Pirine role, not Joe Mixon. And I think it's also important to note that you guys might be like, oh, well, Joe Mixon's your RB13. Like, how are you low on him? It's really more so of running back versus receiver. Like, I'm not going to rank, like, I much prefer a guy like J.K. Dobbins at cost, but I'm not going to rank Dobbins ahead of Mixon because I think it's just dumb. I just have them very close together. Like I have Mixon behind my wide receiver 22. So I have him much lower in the overall ranks, but in terms of positional stuff, it's hard to have Mixon much lower than RB13. He's just not somebody I'm taking much of. Like I have him pushed down in the overall stuff low enough so that I'm not really taking him in these drafts. And same thing can be said about Najee Harris, RB14. Really tough button to press. Like him and Mixon go in like the third round of home leagues. I truly can't get there. Like we look last year, Jaylen Warren blew Najee Harris out of the water in terms of efficiency. Rushing yards over expected per attempt, EPA per rush. Jaylen Warren had a better breakaway run rate. And here's kind of the issue. Jaylen Warren, no one is saying Jaylen Warren is going to unseat Najee Harris. That's not going to happen. But this is a guy where the only season that he has paid off and been a good bet was when he was drafted in the late second as a sheer volume play. He led the NFL in touches, opportunity share, and snap share in 2021, and still was just the RB7 in points per game. That's the outcome you need for him to get to the RB7 in points per game. And when we look at this year, he is not going to lead the league in touches and lead the league in snap share and opportunity share because Jaylen Warren is going to be a thorn in his side. Or this is going to be more of a 65-35 split, where if we look at the most recent preseason game, again, charted by Dwayne McFarland, he didn't get close to that 85% snap share that he had and a 75% rush attempt share that he had in 2021. In this preseason stretch here, he has been at 65-35 split in terms of the snaps, just a 57% rush attempt share. It's not going to be enough. He needs to get to like 80% of the snaps and like 70%, 75% of the rush attempts, and it's just not going to be there when you have Jaylen Warren there, who's getting a lot of buzz, who's looking really good. He reminds me a ton of like Tony Pollard and Austin Eckler when they were behind Melvin Gordon and Zeke Elliott. Again, he's not going to unseat Najee Harris, but he's going to take enough of the volume away where Najee Harris, a guy who has only paid off when he's led the NFL in volume, I just don't see how he gets back to leading the NFL in volume, which where you're drafting him, you need him to do that. But after that, we have Aaron Jones, our RB15, and I don't really know. It's tough to rank Aaron Jones because I still think that he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. He's coming off 4 straight RB1 point per game finishes, but he's now turning 29 this season, and he goes from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, and he has A.J. Dillon breathing down his neck. It's tough. Like, on the peripherals, it's not great for Aaron Jones, but also I wouldn't be shocked at all if, like, his crazy efficiency just continued and he found a way to catch enough passes and score enough touchdowns to still finish as, like, a top 15 back again. So this is, like, the lowest I could possibly have him. And even then, I'm, like, mixing him in sometimes. Then we have our RB16, J.K. Dobbins. Absolutely gushed about him in our breakout running back video, but he is first among all active running backs with 100 or more rush attempts and yards per carry. Even last year off a brutal ACL injury. He never got fully up to speed last year, right? He never had over 55% snap share, but even then, he was 3rd in breakaway run rate, 4th in explosive run rate, 2nd in yards per carry, 4th in NFL Next Gen rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was a really good pure runner. He just couldn't handle the volume. But now 2 years post-ACL, he should be able to handle the volume. He's going to be the main featured back in this Todd Monken offense in Baltimore, which I really just want pieces of and I want to bet on. Todd Monken's a guy who's going to run a higher pace, higher pass volume offense. It's just going to score more points, have longer drives, more yards, everything. And in a pass-first offense, or not a pass-first offense, but a pass-happier offense, you could see J.K. Dobbins catch a lot more passes than you might think. This is a guy who had over 20 catches per season in his college career at Ohio State, something that Zeke Elliott and Eddie George both can't say. So something interesting to look at. Now, Justice Hill is there, and like I'm not saying J.K. Dobbins is going to get 60-plus catches, but 40-plus is in his range. And if he was to hit 40 catches, that would be a huge, huge ceiling raiser for J.K. Dobbins. At RB17, we have Kenneth Walker. He has upside here. Kenneth Walker is not a dead zone running back, but he's not my favorite upside bet to make in this range, right? I prefer J.K. Dobbins and some of the guys that come after him here. But I do understand, like, he is good at football. He was 8th in breakaway run rate last year, 12th in rush yards over expected per attempt. He was the RB16 in points per game, despite not really coming on until Rashad Penny went down last year. I just have concerns about the upside here, where, yes, he has upside as a young player, young ascending player who's talented, but we need touchdowns, we need receiving work. And the issue is I think that they brought in Zach Charbonnet for the sole purpose of the goal line work and the receiving work. This is a guy in Zach Charbonnet who has a 93rd college target share, or 93rd percentile college target share. He catches many more passes than Kenneth Walker did in his entire career. I think Kenneth Walker had just 18 catches in his entire college career. Zach Charbonnet had something like 40 plus or 30 plus in his final year at UCLA. So to me, it seems like they brought in Zach Charbonnet to catch passes, and then also as a guy who is a much steadier play in and play out runner, where Kenneth Walker was super boom bust last year. He was bottom 3 in success rate, which is just on a given play, are you getting what's blocked? And he was boom bust, where a lot of the time it was either he was breaking off a huge home run or he was taking a run for a loss, which is good between the 20s. When you get in close, you need just 3 yards on 3rd and 3, or you need just 2 yards on the goal line on 3rd and goal from the 2. That's going to be Zach Charbonnet's specialty. So that's where it gets really tough for me. I think that the touches that you really want are going to be going a lot of the time to Zach Charbonnet. But I do still think that the talent is there, and I do think that he's not a dead zone back. So if you want to take a swing on Kenneth Walker, you can. Again, I just prefer other guys in this area, like Dameon Pierce, who goes like a round or 2 later than Kenneth Walker in a lot of places. So I end up with a lot more Pierce than him. But Pierce is a super talented rusher, similar to Kenneth Walker, where he was 10th in PFF rush grade last year. He was 12th in yards after contact per attempt. He was 4th missed tackles forced per attempt, 3rd in elusiveness rating. Really, the only 2 holdups with him, we know he's a good rusher of the football. It's, can this Texans offense give us a fantasy-relevant running back, and does he have receiving upside? Now, in terms of the Texans offense, I actually kind of like them a lot. They're the sneaky bounce-back offense. They have the 13th best ETR offensive line. They have C.J. Stroud here, who's like a really high-floor QB to me. Like, I'm not sure if he'll ever be Mahomes, but this is a guy who has some like golf to his game, and can just come in and be a really high-floor, accurate pocket passer. And they brought in a new offense coordinator, I think, from like the Shanahan coaching tree, so that should be interesting as well. They go, to me, from like a bottom 3 offense last year to what should just be a bottom half offense, which is actually a huge step up. And then you also have C.J. Stroud, who is a pocket passer, who's going to be more likely and more willing to check down to a guy like Dameon Pierce. And then Dameon Pierce has more receiving upside than you might think as well, where he was 27th with an 18.7% target per out run last year, which was 27th among 75 qualifying running backs, which is like much better than like your Nick Chubb and Raheem Mostert range, which were outside of the top 50, guys that are just pure rushers. Dameon Pierce is a little bit more than that. He did that just in his first season. He had a 37.6% route participation last year, which was really bad. That was outside the top 36 running backs. He wasn't used in those situations. But in the preseason so far, based on the indications we have here, 67% route participation is really good. Dwayne McFarland tweeted here, like 83% of the snaps. This is 7 drives with C.J. Stroud. 83% of the snaps, 83% of rush attempts, 67% route participation. Obviously, these aren't going to hold, but those are all super strong numbers where even if they regressed like 5 to 10 to 15%, they would all still be really good numbers for Dameon Pierce. So he looks like he has the passing down work. He's going to be a 3-down back. Devin Singletary doesn't really scare me much behind him. He's been pretty inefficient in his entire career. So Dameon Pierce wheels all the way up. Now, our last running back in this tier, our RB19, Javonte Williams. He's coming off a pretty brutal ACL injury, but he's made such insane progress where he's coming off the same ACL injury that really gave J.K. Dobbins problems last year, but he's so far along where J.K. Dobbins was at this time last year in his recovery that I have a hard time saying that Javonte is going to have similar issues as Javonte Williams, where if we look through in the preseason week 2, Javonte had 13 snaps of 23. He had more snaps than Samaje Perine on like a full, 1A in a backfield workload. This was a guy that we were concerned about playing week 1, and in preseason week 2, he was the lead back in this offense. So to me, it only goes up from here. He had 5 targets, 3 carries. Like he was featured. He was the main guy. Like I only think he gets healthier from here. And this is a guy who might be on a touch count early on, but from weeks 5 on could be a fringe RB1 for you that you get at like the 6th, 7th round, which is a really nice payday. We also have on the side here Deepak Chona, one of the doctors in the Twitter space. He said Broncos Javonte Williams is a heavy outlier. Typically you see 20% efficiency dip, but expect much less with Javonte Williams. The average is 3 games to ramp up his touches. So he thinks that he's further along. He also said, yes, Javonte is basically telling us the historical data hasn't reflected his recovery so far. We should keep that in mind as we project his performance. So Javonte Williams, way ahead of schedule, not the same concern as a guy like J.K. Dobbins. So I think at this price, like RB19 is when I have to put Javonte in there. He also has a ton of receiving upside in this offense with Sean Payton, where Sean Payton had, I think, like 16 years as a coach, or like 15 years as a coach with the Saints. He had 13 of those 16 seasons. He had a 15-plus point per game running back. He was only outside of the top 10 teams in target share to the running backs once during his like 15 career stretch with the Saints. He targets his running backs a lot. He's produced a lot of fantasy producers with like Kamara, Reggie Bush, Mark Ingram. I know you guys were on my ass for saying Deuce McCluster in that other video when I was talking about Javonte. I have to be honest, man. Like I thought it was Dexter McCluster. I know who Deuce McAllister is. All right, so everyone chill out in the comments. I'm also 22. I was born in 01, so everyone chill. All right, but after that we have our low end RB2s. James Cook is here as our RB20, and James Cook has been so tough for me to come to terms with. This is a guy who, in my opinion, I think it was very crazy that he was a second-round pick in the NFL draft. He was not a very good prospect. He came out as a silver in my prospect model. Now, my prospect model has legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze as its prospect tiers. Each of them sorted by like hit rate. Silver's hit at about like 25%. And I think with running backs, it's even less than that. And he was one of these rare guys that if you're drafted in the second round of the NFL draft, you're usually a gold. Like Kenneth Walker's a gold, Javonte's a gold. But when we look at James Cook, he came out as a silver, which is bad. And this is a group of your silver running backs drafted in round 2 that were sub 210 pounds. And I have them sorted by their best market share of rushing yards in their college career. James Cook, at his peak in college, he played, I believe, 4 years at Georgia. He had just a 25% rushing opportunity share at his peak, which is crazy. He was never a workhorse back. He was never a guy that handled a ton of volume. To me, I saw him as like a purely receiving back, right? 199 pounds, 12% market share receiving yards is pretty decent, but I mean, like 25% market share rushing yards is like half of a guy like Dexter McCluster and LaMichael James, guys that were like a little bit more gadgety. Or I guess no, LaMichael James in college was cold at Oregon, but like Dexter McCluster was more gadgety even when he got to the NFL, and he had double the amount of James Cook. Now, James Cook was at Georgia, but it's not like this wasn't the time where there was like DeAndre Swift and there was all those studs. Like he was competing with like Kenny McIntosh and your like Jace McClellans. Like the competition wasn't nearly as stiff as it's been in years past. But then he comes out this year, and I'm not sure how much volume he can command. Again, he's undersized. He never commanded a ton of rush attempts in college, but he was also really efficient last year, where he was 6th in targets per out run. He was 15th in yards per out run, 11th in PFF receiving game. He was commanding targets. He was being efficient on those targets. He was looking good by the eyes of PFF. And then he also had good rushing as well, where if you look at his rushing yards over expected per attempt, his EPA per rush, he blew Devin Singletary out of the water last year. His 1.97 rushing yards over expected per attempt was first in Tej Seth's rushing yards over expected per attempt model among all running backs with over 90 rush attempts last year. So he was really good. Now, I will say, a lot of those rushes were against light boxes. James Cook comes out there on passing down situations last year. But, I mean, he was first in breakaway run rate. He was 16th in explosive run rate last year, first in rushing yards over expected per attempt. Like, it's tough to say that he was a very efficient runner last year. Now, of course, it's going to go down when you put the volume up, but it does point to the idea that he could handle more volume and be good on that volume. And then for a guy that has never handled volume, the preseason so far, he's been like a bell cow, which is just insane for a guy who never handled volume in college, and for a guy who is sub 200 pounds. The Bills will come out here in their first preseason game with Damian Harris the other week, and like, I mean, this is insane. He's in a 75-25 split, which is like, so James Cook is getting more touches than the Najee Harris, Jalen Warren split that we saw, or the Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby split. And James Cook is sub 200 pounds, getting 74% of the snaps, 83% of the rush attempts. Like, I think it probably settles around like a 65-35 split or like a 70-30 split. But if that's the split and he gets a passing down role, I mean, he's going to flirt with RB1 numbers, and it's tough to really deny that. Now, I think Damian Harris and Josh Allen are going to be annoying, taking a lot of the goal line stuff away, but if James Cook's going to be used like this in a Bills offense that we know is really good, it's tough to really have him much lower, to not kind of respect his upside here. After, though, we have Alexander Mattison, who is our RB21, and I completely understand that Mattison has crushed in games without Dalvin Cook in his career. But the issue is that was with a different coaching staff, and Mattison just screams dead zone running back to me, where I'm not drafting a ton of him. It's very rare. Like, he is simply propped up that he is the only running back in that Vikings offense people want the volume in the Vikings offense, and that's usually been a trap in years past. When we look at running backs drafted on day 2 since 2000 with less than 40 rushing yards per game in their first 4 seasons, you get this list. It's very rare that you come out as a day 2 pick and you're never featured even in the slightest. We've seen guys like Tevin Coleman carve out roles next to Devontae Freeman. We've seen like Derrick Henry with DeMarco Murray. Like, you at least do something, you know? You at least can do something. A.J. Dillon as well. Like, A.J. Dillon's not even on this list. He couldn't carve out a role that was very significant at all, where he's on a list here with like Ronald Jones and Deonta Foreman and T.J. Yeldon and Kerryon Johnson and Kenyon Drake, Darrell Henderson, guys who have been dead zone backs in previous years. You know, Christine Michael. It's just tough, man. Royce Freeman's on this list. Like Toby Gerhart, that was somebody that people thought was going to be amazing as well. Duke Johnson. So it's just tough, man. Like he's never really popped. He's just been propped up by the usage that he had in the previous coaching regime. I just have a tough time buying into that. So to me, it's tough to really take Alexander Mattison where he goes a lot of times, like in the 5th, 6th rounds. I think Ty Chandler is also going to be firmly in the mix here. I think that they're going to be in the mix as well to take on a free agent running back. It seems like they waived Wade McBride. It seems like they've waived, I think Kene Nwangwu might be getting waived as well. There's a good chance that they pick up like a Leonard Fournette or a Kareem Hunt on this Vikings offense. Like, genuinely look out for that. I don't know if anybody's reported that, but I saw an article that had like the projected 53-man roster, and they were saying that they think that the Vikings are going to pick somebody up. So we'll see. But I think that it's super fragile. Alexander Mattison looks good for week 1, but over an entire season, I don't know if the volume is going to stick here. But our RB22 is then DeAndre Swift, who I absolutely love this year. I keep on moving him up, and Rashad Penny's been getting nothing but negative reviews. It looks like he was like maybe going to get cut. He's made the team since then. But if this lead back role, you know, who's going to be this year's Miles Sanders, comes down to DeAndre Swift versus Kenneth Gainwell, I'm taking DeAndre Swift 10 out of 10 times. Where if we look at Kenneth Gainwell, or actually, I'll just show one of these right now. If we look at Kenneth Gainwell versus DeAndre Swift as just a pure rusher between the tackles, DeAndre Swift absolutely murders him. He is 11 pounds heavier, so I think that he'll get the nod in short yardage situations. He had over 1 yards per carry on him last year. This is stats in 2022, by the way. He had a positive rushing yards over expected per attempt. Gainwell had a negative. DeAndre Swift had 8.1% breakaway run rate. Kenneth Gainwell had 0%. Fun fact, Kenneth Gainwell doesn't have a single rush in the NFL of 20 or more yards. He also doesn't have, I think his longest reception is also 20 yards. So he is not a big play, efficient guy at all. Explosive run percent, about the same, but that's just because I guess like Kenneth Gainwell can get 10-plus yards, but anything past that is tough for him. PFF rush grade, DeAndre Swift killed him. Missed tackles force per attempt, DeAndre Swift is much shiftier. Yards after contact per attempt, DeAndre Swift gets him there. And then as well, so I think that DeAndre Swift is a better rusher than Kenneth Gainwell. And I also think that DeAndre Swift is live to carve out a legit passing game role in this offense where, yes, in previous videos I have said that DeAndre Swift is a fade because I believe that they're not going to throw to the running back a bunch based on the fact that they threw the least amount of targets to their running backs last year. But as much as that's Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts being a rushing first QB, that's not going to check down a ton. I also think that they didn't have a good receiving back last year. If we look at the career receiving stats of DeAndre Swift versus Miles Sanders versus Kenneth Gainwell, DeAndre Swift blows them out of the water in yards per out run. Targets per out run, you know, he's the only one over 20%. Pass rating when targeting, he's the only one over 90. Missed tackles force per attempt. I mean, at least Miles Sanders has juice on his receptions, but 0.8 yards per out run means he's super inefficient. DeAndre Swift has, you know, almost double the missed tackles force per reception as a Kenneth Gainwell, and his career receptions per game is 3.9, which is like more. I think that's actually the same as Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell put together. So DeAndre Swift is their best receiving back they've had in the Jalen Hurts era, and I'll be very interested to see if he can carve out any kind of role, because if he can take on the Miles Sanders role and pair like 50 or more catches with that, then he'll be a league winner, like top 12 guy here. But after that, we have our RB23, Cam Akers. Fringe top 24 guy for me. I'm not really drafting him. This is a guy in a bad offense. He has a lack of receiving upside. It's just super tough to bet on. Like, he has 35 targets in 29 career games here. He was 64th in targets per out run last year. And when you combine the fact that he isn't a great pass catcher, he's not catching a ton of passes, he's in a bad offense here where like Stafford has question marks, the offensive line is pretty rough. I'm just not that interested. Like, there were times last year where McVay preferred Ronnie Rivers, Darrell Henderson, Kyron Williams at certain points, and it's just tough. Like, he had one hot streak last year where from weeks 13 on, he was the RB5 in points per game, but he had just 12 targets over that 6-game stretch, which is not great, and he led all running backs in rushing touchdowns over that span. So he kind of just ran hot in touchdowns, and on a bad offense, I think it's tough to bet on Akers to bail you out with touchdowns again. After that, we have RB24, Rachaad White, and he's similar to James Cook, where he finds himself as a guy who never really had a ton of rush attempts and wasn't really a bell cow in college, but instead of being on the Bills, he finds himself on the Bucks with Baker Mayfield at QB. Now, the bright side of Rachaad White is that he's 214 pounds, runs a 4.4 40, and he had over 50 catches last year. I think he had 50 catches on the dot last year. And catches are great, but in this offense, it's a little bit tough, especially because he's not a great rusher between the tackles. He was 44th in breakaway run rate last year, 67th in missed tackles forced per attempt, 69th in explosive rush rate, 61st in PFF rush grade. Like, it's really tough. I think he had an under 4 yards per carry. This offense isn't like crazy, or this offensive line isn't crazy better here. He's really just pushed up here because you don't have any running back that's like clearly going to take away rush attempts from him, though I think that Sean Tucker is really fun in the late rounds of drafts. It's tough. I mean, maybe he improves, right? We saw Melvin Gordon year 1 to year 2 really improve as a rusher. Maybe he can. It's just that coming out of school, that was never really his calling card between the tackles. And I do have some concerns that he might be just a receiving back, which just, there's not a huge ceiling there in an offense like this if you're just catching passes. But after that, we have our RB25, Miles Sanders. More volume, just sort of propping up these guys. I'm not really buying the receiving role. He hasn't had over 30 catches since he was a rookie. I know that there's been a lot of reports that he's going to have this 3-down workhorse role. I don't really see it. He was outside the top 70 in yards per out run last year. He has a career 0.88 yards per out run. We saw that earlier. That ranked 36th. That would have ranked 36th last year. His career average, like anything over 1 is good. So 0.8 for your entire career means that you're not really a special receiving back. And even if he does have a receiving role, this was a guy last year who had 11 touchdowns and over 1,200 rushing yards and still was just the RB21 in points per game. So if that's like his ceiling, right, the receptions, he's not going to see that same efficiency. He's not going to see those same touchdowns on the Panthers. So those numbers are going to scale back. So even if you had the receptions on top, he's still probably topping out around 12 points per game. And if that's the upside of a guy you're taking as a back-end RB2, I'm just not all that interested. Like, he seems to me kind of like a single more than a home run. And I'm looking for more home runs in the range where you're drafting a Miles Sanders. Now, we have the man of the hour, Jonathan Taylor here, RB26. He gets the huge report yesterday that he's going to stay on the PUP. The Colts cannot find a trade partner for him. And you have a lot going on here. He is out minimum the first 4 weeks. Then after that, this ankle thing that he's been dealing with could be a legit injury that keeps him out, the rest of the year. He could sit out the rest of the year. He could play a few games and then tweak his ankle sort of, and then sit out the rest of the game and say, you know what, I'm not playing. There's a lot of downside here. Now, the positives of Jonathan Taylor is that he's really good, and in games that he plays, he will be an RB1 in fantasy. The other positives, I'm trying to round up all the positives I can right now. They're tough to come by with Jonathan Taylor. I'll be honest. I moved him from my 2-3 turn. I moved him from the top of this tier. Or you can't see it, but I moved him from the top of I had him in this tier, and then I moved him down to the 7th round all the way to low-end RB2s because there's so much uncertainty and so much downside. But the upside here is, again, that he's good at fantasy football. He's good at real-life football. He has incentive to play in at least 2 games. I believe you have to accrue 6 games for a contract year to count, and people are telling me that the 4 games that he's on the PUP will count towards his contract. So he has incentive to at least play. He can't sit out the entire year. He needs to register a year on his contract, or else the holdout and all of this contract stuff has been a whole big waste of time for him. There's also a scenario where he plays from week 5 on and is absolutely fine and he dominates for the Colts. There's a scenario where he gets traded to the Dolphins still, and from week 5 on he dominates in fantasy. So there's still outs here. But if you paid a 3rd round price for him, it doesn't feel good at all. To me, you can take him. Depending on what your risk tolerance is where you can put him among this tier. If you want to put him ahead of Swift here, you can. If you want to put him here, you can. Any higher than this, though, I have a tough time getting there. But for now, I'll have him just here at RB26. Moving on, we have our RB27 here. David Montgomery. These are your high-end RB3s, guys that I feel fine with. As you know, RB2s and hero RB builds, running backs in the mix of my zero RB builds. And Montgomery's interesting because I like Gibbs, but that doesn't really mean I can't like Montgomery as well. Montgomery's not a target or an avoid for me. He's a guy that I'm still sort of mixing in and drafting. He's the bigger back between him and Gibbs. He's 220 pounds. And This is going to be a high-scoring Detroit Lions team. They're going to be probably like a balanced offense, which we like. And David Montgomery is going to probably take the Jamal Williams goal line role, which was really good last year. Established run as the second best offensive line. And he's like a really cozy running back in like 0 RB and hero RB builds. We know he's going to get volume. Gibbs is in a bell cow profile. He's going to get the between the tackles work. He's finished anywhere from like RB32 to RB27 or RB6 in points per game. RB32 to RB6 in points per game. So he has, upside. He has a good floor. And he has league-winning upside where if he can get to 10-plus touchdowns or like he leads the NFL in touchdowns like Jamal Williams did, then he can crush. And then you also get the idea that if Gibbs was to ever go down, David Montgomery is very capable of catching passes. He had 54 catches in his second year in 2020 and was the RB6 in fantasy. That's kind of what his upside scenario looks like, where Gibbs goes down and he gets like 50, 60 catches, something in that range over an entire season. And he's probably a top 12 running back in that like sort of scenario. Now, I will say he's also like a fun he's probably going to open up as the main back here and then cede work to Gibbs as the year goes on. So I like him as a guy in these teams like Breece Hall and Alvin Kamara when you need like early season hammer. Same thing with like a JT as well. Now, our RB28 here is James Conner. And James Conner is so tough for me. Like, he goes in like the 6th round in home leagues. It's really tough for me to want to like James Conner here. I know that the volume is there, but that's really all it is. They just cut Colt McCoy. This is a dumpster fire of a team right now. They have like Clayton Tune or Josh Dobbs as their week 1 starter. Minimum 4 games until Kyler Murray's back, and even then they could just be tanking the entire year. And if they're 0-6, I don't know why Kyler Murray would play. But it's just like James Conner fits all the criteria we want to be avoiding. He's in a bad offense. He has a bad offensive line. There's no like ambiguity here. He is the clear RB1. He's never played a full season in the NFL. He's old. Like, it's just there's a lot here that we don't like outside of the volume. That in home leagues when he's going like 5th, 6th round, I just simply can't get there. Now, I don't mind Alvin Kamara in like the 7th round or later. He's going to serve a 3-game suspension, but once he's back, I think he's pretty much a lock to be like a top 24 guy here. He's coming off a down year last year, but he was still the RB13 in points per game, which is still pretty damn good, like 14 points per game. A lot of running backs, if he can hit 14 points per game in the range that he's going here, where you're drafting him as like an RB3, that's honestly a really good outcome here if you can sort of survive him being suspended. Now, this was on a team where he had 4 total touchdowns, his lowest of his career. This was a bad Saints offense. But we could easily see this offense bounce back. The healthy offensive line here is 11th in established runs offensive line rating or rankings. They got Derek Carr. We could see, Chris Olave take a step forward, and the passing game is actually a threat here. And then I also like the idea that Alvin Kamara. I think that he's been overworked the last 2 years. Where the last 2 years he's had over 200 rush attempts. They bring in Kendra Miller. They bring in Jamal Williams. I think that they realize that less is more with Alvin Kamara. They're going to kind of spell him on those like meaningless touches between the 20s. But I think he's still going to be the receiving guy. He was still 3rd in running backs last year in target share at 18.2%. He was still 5th in yards per out run. He was still efficient in the passing game. And if this offense is better, he's going to score touchdowns as well. So to me, he's kind of a smash. Like, I don't see how he's not an every week RB2 once he's back from suspension at like the absolute worst with like RB1 upside. After that, we have our RB30. Our final running back here, we ran a lot longer than I wanted to. I wanted to keep this under 40 minutes, but we're going to go like just up to an hour mark here. But we have Dalvin Cook at RB30. Issue I have with Dalvin Cook, I don't think that this is the Dalvin Cook of years past. When we look at sort of what his numbers were last year and compare them to 2020 and then 2021, it's just been a downward trajectory here where his yards per carry has gone down, his rushing yards over expected per attempt has gone down, his success rate on NFL Next Gen, that ROE percent number has gone down, EPA per rush has gone down, PFF grade gone down, 10-plus yard carry has gone down, his yards per run is 0.75 and 0.85 the last 2 years. He's just not the same guy. He's coming off a shoulder injury where he's just now practicing as well. Like, Breece Hall's been practicing for the last week or two. Really, what you're drafting Dalvin Cook for is if you have like a Jonathan Taylor, you can get some early season points. Same thing if you have like a 0 RB team, you just need early season points. Dalvin Cook's good for that because I think that he will be the lead back early on while Breece Hall kind of gets his footing. But after that, things get tough. Now, there is an upside scenario that like Breece Hall is cooked off of the ACL and he can never shoulder a 60% plus workload. And then from there, Dalvin Cook is the lead back on what should be a good offense with Aaron Rodgers. So that's sort of exciting. I just don't think Breece Hall being dust after the ACL tear is as likely as some may think that like Dalvin Cook. So this is where we have him. Now, this is your entire tier list. I'll sort of leave this up if anybody wants to, like, I don't know if you want to screenshot it or see the complete list here. But that was our top 30 running back rankings updated post Jonathan Taylor news. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Again, if you want the complete rankings, if you have a home league draft coming up, they are on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. My top 200 is there. They're all tiered. I have my target rounds for each player. My targets and my avoids are all highlighted. It is a sheet that I am bringing in with me to every single one of my drafts, my home leagues, my subscriber leagues, my high stakes leagues. I use it in all of them. So make sure you check it out. It is the number one thing that you need to dominate your home league. On top of that, on the Patreon, too, you get a bunch of other stuff, too. You get my weekly rankings in season, like start-sit rankings. You get an exclusive Sunday morning live stream where I talk through my start-sit decisions and answer your guys' start-sit decisions as well. I release my rest of season rankings, so when you're making trades, you can see how I feel about players during the season. And a weekly fab article where I tell you guys who I'm picking up and how much fab I'm bidding on. It is a ton of value there, so make sure you check it out. But if not, subscribing, leaving a like, leaving a comment really helps us out during this time of the year. So, of course, if you enjoy, please do one of those three things, maybe all of those three things if you're feeling a little bit froggy today. But as always, I appreciate you guys, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like